Welcome to this week's Cattle Call. I'm Susan Littlefield on the Rural Radio Network. We've got a lot of factors in this cattle market this last week since we did this program, including open interest. What is going on there? We know HPAI is still there, though for the most part it's been kind of quiet in the background. It still will be something the market has to attest to. We've got some listener and viewer questions, including consumer demand with the CPI numbers that came out on a Wednesday morning. And how does everything that's happening in the cattle weigh in on what's been going on in the hog market? So if we're going to talk a little hogs in the cattle call, we're not going to tell Brad about that. We're going to have Joe really kind of explain kind of how these two are kind of working side by side. As I mentioned, Joe Kooima is joining us this week as Brad is out on assignment. And Joe, let's kind of talk about where we're at, open interest. What has happened to the open interest with this cattle market?
Well, thanks for having me on this afternoon. Enjoyed doing this kind of stuff. Good question to start. I think it encompasses probably what we're going through the last little while. Every morning we come in to the office here, we take a look to see what the open interest has done. Sometimes it's just what the cattle open interest did, and sometimes you're like, whoa, look what the hogs did in comparison to the live cattle. And ever since last week, Tuesday, Wednesday, we have witnessed just a big mass exodus out of the cattle futures going into hogs. We got numbers in cattle that are below 285,000 total open interest, and hogs were as high as 317,000. So a big shift there. And I think that has been dominating the landscape here. And once you have a big domination of the landscape with this kind of stuff going on, like money flow, that starts to kind of expose maybe some weaknesses that we had in one or the other, vice versa. So I think that's just an exposure thing now. So that's the big thing that I looked at here this morning, that, even watching today's trade, I mean, for the first hour, the market just bounced around 40, 50 higher. I mean, I could look down at my phone, look back up. I'm like, oh, that was a weird move. Why did that happen? And that's just the lack of the funds in the cattle market right now. Usually they were there to kind of support initially, or just flat out get out, but now they're not really participating. So now you get all the computer stuff just flying around, beating each other up or duking it out. So that was a lot of today's stuff initially in the morning anyway.
So how did that tie back with this open interest and what happened? How does it compare to what we saw in this hog market? And how do you see those two kind of merging together a little bit?
I think a lot of it has, unfortunately, this bird flu. We're going to have to talk about it every day, and some days we don't talk about it. The market can kind of respond in positive figures like the last 2 days, but it seems like cattle are the focus on that. They have the microscope underneath them when we hear or see any headline about that. And guess what? The hogs don't right now at this moment in time, and the fundamentals in the hogs are really good. You got cash at highs for the last 6-8 months, cutouts rocking and rolling. We got producers that have no problems getting hogs loads into the packers. So things are a lot better shape over there, and they're deflecting any of this negative news or uncertainty that we have in the cattle market. So the funds just took note and they just went for it. They're not buying hogs and selling cattle as a new position. They're just, we're out of here. We're going to somewhere that's a little bit better for right now. So
a little bit more stability to it per se.
Right.
Now you talked, Joe, about HPAI, and I know we talked about it a little bit in depth the last week with Brad, but it just seems like the markets are grabbing onto whatever headline comes across the news wire, whether it's fact or fiction, or just confusion in how things are worded, including, what states are actually closing borders, what states are saying you got to have paperwork. There's just a lot of uncertainty out there.
Right. And I think the one thing that I learned when I first started here 13 years ago is that when you have the overall aspect of uncertainty in the cattle market, it's just plain no good, because you can have headlines that say things on a positive nature but are still reflecting what brought it down. It's still a negative feature to have. Every day we walk around and we try to figure out what's going on, but when you go home, you're just like, okay, what's going to happen next? And today they found the bird flu in North Carolina. So that's the 7th state, so they're just unfortunately going to test until who knows what. So that's just the constant worry. And I don't like to be a pessimist here by any means, but if COVID taught us a lesson here, it's just don't underestimate what this could really mean, because we can have these black swan events, outside factors that really hurt us, and that's what this is doing, basically.
So cattle, I mean, this week they really tried and tried to hold on to having some positive numbers. And we, like you said, saw a bit of it there at the beginning. But can we possibly turn ourselves back around before the weekend hits us to see another high day?
I'm afraid we probably, if we could do it, it should have been today. But
Okay.
also you look at the chart, it's a severe downtrend, and sometimes you can have a 3-day bounce. And we certainly tried that. But then the trend guys came in today, and just all the uncertainty there. And the cash market just doesn't have some legs under it. And we've lost, as a feedlot, just our leverage has kind of gone away right now. So the other thing too, with the funds exiting, we need to coerce them to come back in to our market. Maybe that does take 2-3 weeks. I mean, we, tune in a few weeks from now, we're probably going to feel a little bit better. We're going to be right close to some demand periods. But you just have to chop around here, and we have to get the fund money to come back in here and like the positions.
Well, CPI came out on a Wednesday morning. How do you see that weighing in on this cattle market?
Certainly the wrong time for it, when we have such a big collapse in the marketplace, because anything that was kind of on the sideline goes back to focus, right? How's our demand? Well, when you get a bad CPI number like this, it exposes it to a bigger presence. And right, this morning, 7:30, watch the S&Ps go from 10 higher to 60 higher. It just doesn't put a good feeling in your stomach at all. When you got the cattle, the trending that the way they are, it's not helping out. So just bad timing for it. I mean, we all can have our theories of, election year, all that type of stuff. That's not going to go down. It should go higher. I mean, but when you just put it under the focal point in the trending market, it's just not good.
All right, one final question for you. And this one, of course, coming from a listener/viewer. He's wondering consumer demand as we move closer to grilling season, now considering everything that happened with the CPI and just what's happening in general with the consumer dollar. Do you have any concerns?
A little bit exposed today. But they're talking about beef demand is definitely different than any other demand. You're still going to have a certain percentage of those with disposable income that still go back to it, and even some that are kind of on the verge of, should I get that ribeye or should I go somewhere else in the meat counter? I think it's kind of a temporary thing more than anything. You got some seasonal alignments where you drag a little bit lower here, but we're not too far away from Mother's Day and Memorial Day. But it seems like next week we'll talk about something different, and the stock market can rebound too. So just a couple day event here.
All right, let's dust off the grills. It is official spring planting time, so we might as well move on and consume a lot more proteins.
Right.
Well, thanks, Joe, for joining us this week. What's the best way for folks to get a hold of you guys?
You can visit us on our website, kkvtrading.com, or 1-800-358-3047 to talk to any one of us here.
All right. Thanks, Joe Kooima, filling in today for Brad. Quick reminder, commodity futures and options do involve a substantial risk of loss, not suitable to all investors. And that's this week's Cattle Call on the Rural Radio Network.